Most people live on paychecks. You go to work, you earn a set amount, and that becomes your entire financial engine. This chart shows how that engine usually runs. You earn money, and the government takes its cut. Then, bills take another chunk. If anything is left at the bottom, maybe you save or invest. Earn, get taxed, spend, repeat. But the wealthiest people in the world operate on a completely different pattern. In some years, they might report almost zero traditional income. Instead of relying on a salary, they finance their lives by borrowing massive sums of money against the assets they already own. Taking on more debt sounds backwards if you want to be rich, but the tax system is structured to reward people who hold on to their assets. Borrowing against them is a primary way to preserve immense wealth. Before we look at the billionaires, there's a small-scale version of this strategy you might already be using. It involves accounts like a 401k, an IRA, or a health savings account. These are specialized savings plans that allow your money to grow while limiting the government's cut. This diagram shows why these tools exist. On the left, an unprotected account loses a percentage of gains to taxes every year. On the right, the shielded account grows uninterrupted. Depending on the rules, the money inside compounds either tax-deferred or tax-free. Using these common accounts is the easiest way for average earners to apply the exact same principle the wealthy use, protecting financial growth from taxation. I used to think earning a higher salary was the only path to building wealth. Then I hit an unexpected expense. I needed liquid cash quickly, so I sold off some of my investments to cover the bill. The moment I sold, a significant portion of the gains I had spent years building disappeared. They went straight to taxes. Building wealth depends on what you keep. By selling those investments, I had triggered a tax event that dissolved years of growth in a single afternoon. To see how large this penalty can get, imagine someone whose wealth is not in a bank account, but tied up in a portfolio of stocks, real estate, and private businesses. Now, imagine this person needs cash to buy a house or a new piece of property. The obvious move would be to sell off some of those investments to free up the money. Let's look at a chart showing how the tax penalty scales. Sebe originally bought shares for roughly $1 million. Over decades, those assets grew. Today, those exact same shares are worth around $50 million. If they sell, they receive the cash, but the government looks at the $49 million of profit. This entire block becomes a taxable capital gain. A capital gain is simply the profit earned from the sale of an asset that is increased in value. Depending on the specific asset and local tax rules, that single bill can be enormous. For portfolios of this size, standard liquidation is a trap that rapidly drains wealth. So instead of selling, they call a bank. They ask to borrow a few $1,000,000 against their investments. The bank evaluates the hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in the account and uses it strictly as collateral to secure the loan. Collateral is an asset a borrower offers as a way for a lender to secure the debt. Because the loan is backed by highly valuable assets, the bank can offer the cash at an extremely low borrowing rate. The borrower walks out the door with liquid cash to spend. They did not have to sell a single share to get it. This diagram illustrates the legal outcome. On one side, the investment portfolio remains whole. On the other, the borrower has their liquid cash. Because no sale occurred, the tax indicator in the middle stays exactly at zero. No capital gains event was triggered. And it gets better. Since the original investments were never sold, they stay in the market. While the borrower spends their loan, their assets can keep compounding and growing. This borrow instead of sell maneuver is a standard, fully legal strategy in wealthy circles. It explicitly decouples your spending power from your tax liability. You do not need billions of dollars to learn something useful from this. The core principle is to keep your assets growing. Give your investments the time and space they need to compound uninterrupted over the long haul. At the same time, navigate the financial tools available to you to avoid triggering unnecessary tax events. Building and keeping real wealth requires looking past the simple cycle of earning and spending. It means understanding the structural rules of the system and using them to protect exactly. The ultra-wealthy have a specific method for keeping their money out of the IRS's hands. Instead of selling their assets for cash, they borrow against them. To understand why this works, we have to look at how investments are usually taxed. For most things you own, you generally only owe capital gains tax when you actually sell the asset. This chart shows an asset that you bought for $10. If that asset climbs to $1,000, you have a massive gain on paper. But because you haven't sold it, that growth is considered an unrealized gain. And as the flat line at the bottom shows, your tax owed on that growth is exactly zero. Think of this like owning a house that has doubled in value since you bought it. You have generated a lot of wealth, but you haven't received any physical cash. The value is just sitting there inside the property, completely untaxed. By refusing to sell, they maintain a legal buffer against taxation. This makes simple holding the primary behavior for amassing a massive net worth. This holding rule applies to stocks, private businesses, and real estate investments. As long as you hold the asset, the growth is sheltered. But this creates a very practical problem. If your entire net worth is successfully locked away inside these growing investments, you don't actually have any money in your bank account to live on. You can be worth hundreds of millions on paper, but you can't hand shares of a private business to a cashier to buy groceries. The wealth is entirely immobile. They have to figure out a method to extract spendable cash without breaking the tax shield that comes from holding their assets. To get cash, they take out personal loans by pledging the appreciating assets as collateral instead of liquidating them. Banks are highly motivated to approve these requests. The loans are securely backed by tangible, highly valuable assets, which also means the bank can offer significantly lower interest rates than unsecured debt. For the borrower, the benefit is immediate. They get an injection of physical, spendable cash deposited right into their account, while retaining full ownership of their original investments. Because technically no sale has occurred, the IRS does not view a loan as income, so this transaction bypasses capital gains taxes completely. Through this mechanism, the borrower invents a parallel, entirely untaxed stream of cash. They fund their lifestyle while legally staying outside the traditional income tax system. This bar chart compares the two options. On the left is the immediate penalty of a tax bill from selling assets outright. On the right is the long-term cost of loan interest. Depending on the exact loan terms and the individual's tax brackets, paying the interest to the bank is often cheaper than paying taxes to the government. But there is a secondary advantage happening at the same time. While the borrowed money is being spent, those original unsold assets are still invested and generating new growth. As long as the asset's growth rate outpaces the interest rate on the loan, the gap between what they owe and what they own widens. This increases their net wealth even as they carry debt. This runs counter to traditional financial advice. In this specific scenario, acquiring debt doesn't drain an individual's net worth. It actively allows them to grow richer while spending simultaneously. All of this builds to the final phase of the life cycle, which is triggered when the original owner of the assets passes away. When an individual dies, the assets they leave behind are subjected to a specific U.S. tax rule known as a step-debt basis. A step-debt basis is a tax provision that adjusts the value of an inherited asset to its current market value at the time of the original owner's death, rather than its original purchase price. If a business grows from $1 to $100 million, the shaded area represents 99 million of untaxed gains. Upon death, the basis resets to 100 million. If heirs sell, that earlier appreciation avoids capital gains tax. This legal reset wipes out an entire lifetime of capital gains liability in a single moment. It ensures that the absolute maximum amount of capital transfers intact to the next generation. This flowchart represents the complete life cycle. You buy the assets, you borrow against them instead of selling, you let them grow, and eventually you transfer them at death to erase the gains. This is often viewed as a strategy exclusively reserved for billionaires. But the underlying mechanics, delaying taxation, allowing investments to compound uninterrupted, and being strategic about selling are highly effective strategies that everyday investors can apply on a smaller scale. However, while this system is powerful, applying it without understanding the associated risks can lead to ruin. To use it safely, we have to look at the exact mistakes people make when they first attempt it. When people first learn how the ultra-wealthy use borrowed money to avoid selling assets and delay taxes, the reaction is almost always the same. They see the headlines, look at their own bank balance, and decide to start playing by those same rules. Discovering these strategies typically triggers a few highly predictable emotional and financial reactions. Most people either try to replicate the mechanics immediately or become so frustrated by the inequality of the system that they disengage from their finances entirely. But rather than building wealth, most of these reactions actually leave the everyday investor in a mathematically weaker position than when they started. Copying the tactics of the ultra-rich without possessing their underlying financial architecture is a direct path to wealth destruction. To see why, we need to look at the 4 specific mistakes people make when they try to mimic this strategy. The first mistake happens when people assume that because billionaires borrow heavily, all debt is inherently good. They hear about leverage and use it to justify swiping a credit card for a luxury vacation or a new wardrobe. When the ultra-wealthy borrow against their portfolios, they are securing a relatively low interest rate, backed by highly valuable collateral. This chart shows the exact condition required for this strategy to work. The value of the underlying asset is expected to grow faster than the cost of the loan. The collateral itself is doing the heavy lifting over the long term. This updated chart shows what happens with consumer debt. If you fund a vacation on a high-interest credit card, you are borrowing to buy an experience that instantly loses financial value, while the cost of holding that debt accelerates. You fall right into a mathematical trap. The interest rate works actively against you, and there is no underlying asset growth to outpace it. These are 2 completely different financial mechanics. They share the word debt, but they have nothing else in common. Using billionaire strategies to justify credit card spending guarantees a financial loss. You have learned the exact wrong lesson. The second mistake is attempting to copy asset-backed borrowing with a modest investment account. An investor might see a few $1,000s in a brokerage app and decide to take out a margin loan to free up some cash. This flowchart illustrates the primary risk of that move: a margin call. A margin call is a broker's demand that an investor immediately deposit more money or sell off assets to cover potential losses on a loan. A billionaire has a massive cushion of cash and other resources to satisfy that call. An everyday investor usually does not. If the market drops, the broker forces you to sell your investments at the worst possible time. A strategy meant to generate liquidity instantly wipes out years of your careful progress. That harsh reality leads directly to the third, most common mistake. People look at the steep advantages held by the ultra-wealthy, get frustrated by the system, and stop trying altogether. They push their financial documents aside and disengage. The tax code does favor people who already hold large assets, but walking away from your own financial growth because someone else has an advantage is the single most damaging reaction you can have. It is the financial equivalent of refusing to exercise because professional athletes have superior genetics. They might have a head start, but you still benefit directly from doing the work. Every dollar you invest and every tax advantage you utilize guarantees a mathematically stronger position than the one you are in yesterday. The fourth mistake is assuming that sophisticated tax planning applies solely to billionaires. People hear about complex trusts and shell companies and assume the entire concept of tax strategy is off limits to them. The system actually has powerful tools built directly into it for regular earners. These include standard retirement accounts, health savings accounts, and long-term capital gains treatment. A health savings account, or HSA, is a specialized account that lets you save money tax-free to pay for medical expenses. Long-term capital gains treatment is a tax rule that charges you a lower rate on profits from assets you've held for more than a year. The primary reason regular earners fail to use these tools isn't because they are overly complicated. It is because they assume tax planning is a wealthy person's game. This chart shows the invisible penalty of that assumption. When you ignore these standard tools, you hand over extra taxes every single year. The top path shows your potential wealth expanding when you keep that money, while the bottom path shows the drag of unnecessary taxes draining your portfolio. Ignoring everyday tax tools creates a compounding cost that destroys your savings trajectory over time. The decisions you make in these everyday environments dictate your financial reality. Confusing consumer credit with strategic borrowing traps you in high-interest debt. Trying to copy margin borrowing without a safety cushion exposes your modest portfolio to sudden liquidation. Giving up entirely because the system feels rigged ensures you never build momentum. And assuming tax planning is only for the rich guarantees you will surrender thousands of dollars in unnecessary fees. You don't need to copy the reckless parts of a billionaire's playbook. You just need to extract the intelligent mechanics of wealth building and apply them to your own accounts. There are specific, immediate steps you can take today to build a highly tax-efficient, growth-focused portfolio, no matter where your starting line happens to be. You understand how the ultra-wealthy use loans for spending instead of relying on paychecks or selling assets. Sustainable wealth grows by prioritizing assets, minimizing unnecessary taxes, and remaining intentional about when and how you choose to sell. You do not need billions of dollars in the bank to apply those mechanics. The underlying math works exactly the same at any financial level. Replicating this approach requires a shift in how you measure wealth, followed by a specific sequence of actions you can start taking today. Step 1. Track your net worth, not just income. Wealthy individuals focus on what they own. Net worth is simply everything you own minus everything you owe. Add up your savings, investments, retirement accounts, and property. Then subtract liabilities like credit cards and mortgages. Tracking that final number every month shifts your attention. You stop thinking about surviving between pay periods and start focusing on building a permanent base of capital. Step 2 puts that capital to work. Increase your contributions to tax-advantaged accounts. If your employer offers a 401k, learn the match rules. Look into an IRA, or individual retirement account, and an HSA, which is a health savings account designed for medical expenses. This flowchart illustrates exactly why these accounts are useful. Depending on their specific rules, they offer tax-deferred or tax-free growth. Your money bypasses immediate taxation and enters the market intact. Keeping more of your cash invested and losing less of it to standard taxes along the way is the closest everyday equivalent to the shielding strategies used by the ultra-wealthy. You don't need offshore accounts or complex legal entities. Using the standard financial tools that already exist creates a robust foundation for building wealth. Step 3 protects that foundation. Before you liquidate any investment, run through a simple 3-question checklist. Ask yourself, do I really need this cash right now? How long have I owned this asset? And exactly what kind of tax bill will this sale create? This timeline chart reveals why the second question matters. Gains on investments held for less than a year are taxed as ordinary income, exactly like your paycheck. Cross that 1-year threshold, and those assets often qualify for a much lower capital gains rate. Step 4 removes the friction of decision-making. Automate your investing so your asset base expands without requiring daily motivation. As this diagram displays, setting up a recurring transfer from your checking account to an investment or retirement account builds a continuous loop. The consistency of the transfer matters far more than the size of the initial amount. Over time, an automated system yields more assets that can benefit from compounding, the process where your investment returns begin generating their own returns. It also creates a wider safety net for navigating difficult financial stretches. Taking a short pause before you sell, while automating your systems to buy, strips the emotional reactions out of your financial growth. Step 5 is maintaining a solid cash buffer. Storing a few months' worth of essential living expenses in cash gives you crucial breathing room. This graph demonstrates how cash flexibility protects you. When emergencies hit, a cash buffer stops you from selling investments at a market loss or taking on high-interest debt at the worst possible moment. Step 6 involves looking past short-term volatility. Start thinking in decades, not months, to realize the full potential of the borrow instead of sell strategy. This exponential compounding curve shows what happens when you hold quality assets for years, sometimes generations. Time is the single most important variable for allowing compounding to reach its mathematical limit. Every time you interrupt that growth with an unnecessary sale and a resulting tax bill, you reset the math and damage your long-term results. You don't need to be wealthy today, and you don't need a perfect portfolio. You simply need to stop measuring your progress by your next paycheck and build a resilient system that outlasts temporary market pressures. The ultra-wealthy play a long game. Building this systematic, asset-first approach is the exact piece of their strategy that anyone can copy for free. If this breakdown made the borrow versus sell idea clearer, leave a like so I know to produce more videos like this. Send this to a friend who still thinks wealthy people live on giant paychecks. Comment borrow or sell below to let me know which strategy you are focusing on. I post new videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, so hit subscribe and I will see you in the next one.